Hello, in this video overview, I will review our study, an examination of transition and identity among intercollegiate student athletes in graduate school. Three authors that worked on this study: Elizabeth Gregg, Andrea Buonanno, and Amanda Blackwood Pascal. In the next couple of slides, I'll talk about the background literature that we sought for this study toward the transition and identity of student athletes in graduate school. First, Melendez tells us that compared to the traditional student athletes experience elevated levels of graduation rates, institutional attachments, and levels of academic adjustment. To that end, first-year student athletes experience lower levels of stress and loneliness compared to their traditional student peers. When it comes to identity, what we found was that student athletes often have challenges when it pertains to their identities as student and student athletes. A considerable amount of literature has been focused on the undergraduate intercollegiate student athlete. Most recently, student athletes that still possess eligibility are electing to use that remaining time to pursue a graduate degree. And with that being said, in order for universities to better serve this unique population, more research is needed. So the purpose of our study is to examine how graduate student athletes balance their identities as a graduate student and intercollegiate student athlete. Athletic identity has a strong impact on the ability of a student athlete to thrive in the classroom. Either athletics or academics can take precedence for student athlete identity. And to add, when student athletes are on the field or wearing their team gear on campus, they identify mostly as athletes. And on the other hand, when they are engaged in a class or in a tutoring session with their academic advisor or specialist, or in the academic center, their identities turn to being a student. The research also shows that as an athlete, it goes further into their college career, their dual role dwindles down to one role as solely a student athlete, taking on more weight than the student role. In continuing with athletic identity and academic experience, research tells us that student athletes who forge a dual role into just of that as an athlete were more likely to declare a major that would be a better fit for their athletic schedule and less demanding of their time. And so due to these time constraints of being a student athlete, particularly athletic participation, the conflict between the two roles is often present, and the now athlete is more likely to experience negative effects during their college career. Thus, despite these scholarly contributions, more research on graduate student athlete identity is necessary in order to understand this unique population. So to understand more about the process of the student athlete's transition to graduate school, we sought to answer these questions. How do collegiate athletes arrive at the decision to pursue graduate study? And how does athletic eligibility and athlete identity influence intentions to persist in a graduate study? To frame our study, we utilize perspectives provided by the role-strain theory and the adult transition theory. The role-strain theory asserts that social institutions depend on the role relationships, that individual identity consists of multiple roles, and that an individual's cumulative role almost always exceeds their ability to meet them all satisfactorily. With the adult transition theory, the authors identified 4 ways in which individuals adjust or cope during their transition. This theory is termed the 4S system: situation, self, support, and strategies all influence the success of the transition process. We have completed this study, and this study used a multi-site case study with 2 universities, bounded by the time and by participant criteria as described below. So we explored the identity balancing process of student athletes from a subjective lens. That is, we wish to give a voice to the student athlete experience and reality of our participants. We contacted campus athletic directors in order to contact and receive consent from graduate student athletes and share study information, and our interviews were conducted in a semi-structured way. So for this study, we had 6 participants, 6 graduate student athletes, with those student athletes, one of the student athletes only having a face-to-face instruction for their graduate degree. 2 were females from 2 different races, 4 males from 3 different races, and those participants, all of them were in 4 different sports. And I think it's also important to add that 2 of our participants were from transfer institutions. So they completed their undergraduate degree at another institution and came to the university to pursue a graduate degree while finishing their eligibility. The analysis of the data revealed 3 major themes: that life revolves around sport, graduate student athlete role conflicts, and preparation for life after sport. In the first theme, on your screen, you'll read feedback as it pertains to life around sport. So participants talked about growing up in sport, having to be a student athlete in order to play the sport they loved. And they also mentioned time constraints of being an athlete and the admission of home life many times. Continuing with our first theme, as it pertains to the selection of graduate programs, feedback spoke to the inability to complete an internship as classmates have, and the pursuit of an alternative degree in order to be successful at both being a student and being an athlete. In our second theme, our participants reflected on several aspects of the graduate study that they felt were in conflict with the expectations of their athletic demands, one mainly being group work. This was particularly a challenging task for our population due to the graduate school expectations. Additionally, traveling to competitions were another challenge for graduate student athletes. One student athlete spoke about the difficulties of being a graduate student as it pertains to the workload. And Kenzie, one of the participants who took face-to-face courses, ended up missing 12 classes in one semester due to her participation in sport. Several participants also spoke about the standards for success in graduate school as compared to their undergraduate study, even their teammates, and added the pressure that they had as a graduate student athlete. One student athlete confirmed that the pressure of having to obtain a B or higher in order to stay in the program, whereas his teammate may be able to get a C or a D just to even pass the course. One student athlete also felt that her coach, because of being a student athlete, held her to a higher standard rather than her other teammates who were in an undergraduate program. Our third theme was life after sport. Each of our participants detailed in their own way how they intended to prepare for life after sport. Several participants directly discussed that pursuing a graduate degree played a large part in their transition. Several other participants also expressed that they originally pursued a graduate degree study only to continue to play their sport, but as they progressed through the program, they began to view it as an opportunity to transition out of the real world. In continuing with our third theme, the participants expressed time constraints inhibited their ability to engage in internships and other professional trainings. So, one particularly spoke about being able to spend more time, or wishing to rather be able to spend more time socially with their peers and having more time for his career. Another student athlete spoke about the constraints of being able to pursue an internship due to her career choice and her athletic season. So, that being said, and the data that we were able to collect from our study, researchers have found that student athletes who had lower levels of athletic identity achieved at a higher rate of academic success than those that had a higher level of athletic identity. And additionally, it has been reported that student athletes struggle with life after sport if they're not properly prepared for the transition. So, this research has supported some of our findings. And to that end, participants in this study possessed a strong sense of athletic identity, especially when they initially entered their graduate degree programs. Their athletic identity was evident in their day-to-day commitment to their sport, and then the way they described and prioritized sport over opportunities such as networking that were provided to them as graduate students that they often could not attend due to their athletic identity. We found that graduate student athletes selected graduate programs based on their athletic demands, as opposed to opting for the most applicable program for their future career interests, and that sometimes this choice was influenced by athletic advisors, demonstrated one way in which graduate students are different from other graduate student populations. So we postulate that the space provided to more fully explore academic pursuits in graduate school allows for the development of a more balanced identity, which in turn aids in successful transition out of sport. So, to conclude, again, this study examined the identity, negotiation, and transition of graduate student athletes. The three themes that surfaced for us were that life revolves around sport, graduate student athlete role conflicts, and preparation for life after sport. The analysis of these three themes revealed that graduate student athlete participants in this study used their status as graduate students as part of a strategy. That strategy was to transition, whereby they began to adopt new roles and routines in preparation for their lives after sport. And we conclude that university administrators, coaches, and faculty should encourage graduate study for student athletes in order to continue to seek ways to support graduate student athletes in their identity transition process.